The Galactic Council chamber was silent, an eerie, suffocating silence that hung heavy in the air. Holographic displays flickered, showing the devastation spreading across the stars. Once thriving worlds were now nothing more than burned-out husks, their civilizations erased as if they had never existed. The HFY Dominion had come, and they were unstoppable. Representatives from the most advanced species in the galaxy sat around the massive circular table, their faces pale with fear. The Uhaverans, known for their unmatched intelligence, had no solutions. The warlike Drakvin, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had already lost their home system in a matter of hours. Even the elusive Serapheri, whose cloaking technology was thought to be impenetrable, had been hunted down and exterminated. There was no strategy, no defense, no escape. The Council's supreme speaker, an aged Serapheri with deep-set eyes, finally spoke. His voice trembled. No species has ever survived an encounter with the HFY. They are not just invaders. They are erasers of existence. The chamber darkened as the next transmission played. A panicked voice crackled through the speakers. "This is High Command of the Ruvok homeworld. We are under attack. Our planetary shields have been breached. They're inside the system. We never even saw them coming." The voice turned to a desperate scream before it was cut off. The screen shifted, showing the last recorded footage from Ruvok's capital city. Thousands of metallic figures moved like a swarm through the streets. HFY battle drones, each standing 9 feet tall, with razor-sharp limbs and glowing red optics. They moved with terrifying precision, erasing everything in their path. The recording ended. Silence followed. An HFY general stood, his claws tapping against the metal floor. "We must evacuate our homeworlds. Disperse into deep space. If we scatter, we may survive." A Drakvin warlord slammed his fist against the table. "Cowards, we must fight. We cannot let them take everything from us." Another voice whispered from the shadows, cold and pragmatic. "Fight. With what?" The HFY do not use traditional warfare. They do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They arrive. They erase. They move on. The Supreme Speaker turned to his advisors. "Then we must prepare for the inevitable." His voice broke. "We must accept extinction." A low beep interrupted the discussion. Another incoming transmission. The screen flickered to life, showing a lone officer in a dimly lit room. He wore battle-scarred armor, and his face was bruised. "Admiral Rowan of the United Nations Space Force," an assistant announced. All eyes turned to the human transmission. Rowan's voice was calm, but his expression was hard. "We intercepted a HFY transmission." He took a deep breath. "Their next target is Earth." Murmurs spread through the council chamber. The humans, the youngest race in the galactic community. They had barely begun exploring the stars, and yet they were about to face the full force of the HFY. The Supreme Speaker's voice was soft, almost pitying. "You should leave while you still can, Admiral. The HFY will not spare your world." Rowan leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "We're not running." The chamber fell silent. The HFY general blinked in disbelief. "You mean you're going to fight them?" Rowan nodded. "Yes." The warlord of the Drakvin let out a low chuckle. "Madness." Rowan's voice didn't waver. "Maybe, but we don't surrender." The transmission cut off. The Supreme Speaker closed his eyes. "Humans," he whispered, "fools." Far from the Council's debates, deep in the void of space, the first battle was about to begin. Commander Elias Bonner stood on the bridge of the UNSF Valor, staring at the holographic map. The HFY fleet was approaching Alpha Centauri, Earth's closest outpost. If the colony fell, Earth would be defenseless. Bonner exhaled slowly. He had seen war before. He had lost friends. He had killed enemies. But nothing had prepared him for this. The HFY weren't just another enemy. They were death itself. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Kara Holt, stood beside him. "Fleet is in position," she reported. "Scanners show nothing yet." Bonner's jaw clenched. That was the problem. The HFY never arrived on sensors. They didn't announce their presence. They simply appeared. And when they did, it was already too late. A red warning light flashed across the control panels. "Sir," a technician called out, his voice shaking. "We've lost contact with Outpost 9. Bonner turned sharply. "Lost contact? Explain." The technician's hands trembled over the console. One moment, the station was transmitting normally. The next, nothing. Bonner's stomach twisted. "Show me the last visual feed." The technician hesitated before pressing a button. The screen flickered to life. The outpost was intact, its silver towers gleaming under the distant sun. Then, suddenly, blackness. No explosion. No warning. Just gone. Holt took a step back. "Sir, what the hell?" Before she could finish, alarms blared. Multiple signatures appearing out of nowhere. Another officer shouted. They breached the system. On the main screen, they appeared. Zelfar warships materialized like ghosts. Massive, angular constructs of dark metal, gliding through space without sound, without hesitation. They moved in perfect synchronization, like a swarm of mechanical nightmares. Bonner's heart pounded. "Fire all forward batteries." The Valor and its fleet launched a barrage of missiles and plasma rounds. Explosions rippled across the void, but the XL-FAR ships barely flinched. Their adaptive shielding absorbed the attacks like water vanishing into sand. Then, the counterattack came. Bright red beams lanced through the darkness, moving faster than any human weapon. The first human battleship exploded in an instant, its shields useless against the XL-FAR's precision strikes. Another ship followed, then another. The bridge shook violently as the Valor took a direct hit. Sparks erupted from the control panels. Shields at 30%. Bonner gritted his teeth. Fall back. Now. The fleet tried to retreat, but the XL-FAR were relentless. They moved ahead of them, cutting off every escape route. A new alert flashed on the screen. "Sir," Holt whispered, they're broadcasting something." Bonner turned toward the transmission. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the bridge. "You will be erased." Then, static. Bonner's hands clenched into fists. His people were dying. His fleet was crumbling. The enemy was beyond anything they had ever faced. And yet, in that moment, he felt something rise within him. Not fear, not despair. Something colder, harder. Rage. He activated the comms. "To all surviving ships, prepare for a counterattack." Holt's eyes widened. "Sir, we're outgunned." Bonner's voice was steady. "I don't care." He turned back to the screen, staring at the monstrous fleet ahead. If Earth was going to fall, then humanity would make damn sure the XL-FAR bled for it. The sky burned red. From the moment the XL-FAR fleet entered the Sol system, Earth's fate was sealed. They did not slow. They did not hesitate. They came like a storm, sweeping aside everything in their path. The last line of defense, the United Nations Space Force, had already been shattered at Alpha Centauri. The remnants of the fleet, damaged, outgunned, exhausted, limped back to Earth, knowing they were bringing death with them. Admiral Rowan's voice echoed across every channel. "This is not a fight we win. This is a fight we survive. If you're still breathing, then you're still in this war." On the bridge of the UNSF Valor, Commander Elias Bonner watched the enemy fleet advance. Dark, angular warships moved like shadows, blotting out the stars. Earth's orbital defense grid opened fire. Missiles, railgun rounds, plasma bolts, all launched in a desperate attempt to hold the line. Explosions lit up the void, but the XL-FAR barely slowed. Their shields shimmered, adapting, absorbing every attack. A bright flash erupted as the UEG Ares, one of Earth's last dreadnoughts, was sliced in half by a single XLFAR energy beam. It didn't explode. It simply came apart, its pieces drifting into the abyss. Inside Earth's main military command center, deep beneath Geneva, frantic voices filled the room. Screens flickered with tactical data. Casualties were already in the millions, and the battle had only just begun. "We've lost contact with 3 orbital stations," an officer reported, sweat dripping down his face. A general slammed his fist against the table. "How the hell are we supposed to fight an enemy that doesn't miss? That doesn't stop." President Caldwell stood at the center of the chaos, her hands clenched. "We hold them off as long as we can," she said. "Evacuate as many civilians as possible." The room fell silent. There was no evacuation. The XLFAR didn't take prisoners. Above the planet, the battle turned into a massacre. XLFAR dropships descended through the atmosphere, sleek and silent. They bypassed anti-air defenses as if they weren't even there. The first one landed in the heart of New York City. It opened like a flower, releasing an army of metallic horrors. 9-foot-tall battle drones marched forward, their glowing red optics scanning for targets. They didn't move like machines. They moved like predators. A single one could tear through an entire squad of human soldiers. There were thousands of them. The battle for Earth had begun. Bonner and his surviving fleet had no choice but to retreat to the surface. Fighting in space was suicide. Fighting on the ground, at least they had a chance. The Valor's engines screamed as it broke through the atmosphere, emergency thrusters slowing its descent. All across the planet, human warships crash-landed, their crews scrambling to regroup. Bonner barely made it out of the burning wreckage before the first XLFAR attack wave hit his position. He and his squad, bruised and battered, dug into the ruins of an old skyscraper. "Hold the line," Bonner roared, raising his rifle. The streets became a war zone. XLFAR drones moved with terrifying efficiency, cutting through defenses with energy blades and pulse cannons. Human soldiers fought with everything they had: rifles, grenades, even their bare hands. But for every XLFAR destroyed, 10 more took its place. Near the United Nations bunker, Lieutenant Kara Holt and her team fought desperately to protect the president's convoy. They ran through the burning streets, the sky filled with falling debris and plasma fire. A XLFAR war machine, a towering construct with bladed limbs, leaped onto a military transport, ripping it apart like paper. Holt turned, leveling her launcher. "Eat this." She fired a high-explosive round. The blast sent the war machine staggering, but it didn't fall. It turned its glowing red eyes toward her. Then it charged. Holt barely dove aside before the machine's claws slashed through concrete where she had stood. She rolled, grabbing a fallen soldier's sidearm. One shot, one chance. She aimed for the exposed wiring in its neck and pulled the trigger. The war machine twitched. Its optics flickered, then dimmed. It collapsed. Holt exhaled, pulling herself up. She had no time to celebrate. More were coming. Across the planet, similar battles raged. Paris, Moscow, Beijing, Cairo. No city was spared. Every resistance pocket fought like cornered wolves. But the XLFAR weren't just winning. They were exterminating. In the White House, military leaders made their final stand. President Caldwell sent one last transmission to any surviving forces. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of a dying world. "To the people of Earth," she said, "fight. Fight for every inch of this planet. Fight because we will not go quietly. They may burn our cities, but they will never break our spirit. Humanity does not surrender." As the transmission ended, the XLFAR breached the bunker. The last image anyone saw of the president was her standing defiantly as the doors were blown apart. Bonner and his squad fought their way through the ruins of New York, searching for survivors. His armor was cracked, his rifle nearly out of ammo. But he kept moving. The radio crackled. "Bonner," Holt's voice came through, strained but alive. We're falling back to the old subway tunnels. If you can hear this, get down here. It's the last defensible position." Bonner turned to his men. "We're not done yet." They ran through the burning city. Buildings collapsed around them, Xelfar drones hunting them through the wreckage. They reached the subway entrance just as the sky turned black. Bonner stopped, looking up. His blood ran cold. The Xelfar mothership was descending. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a massive monolithic construct, miles wide, moving with unnatural silence. It wasn't just landing. It was preparing the final blow. Holt's voice came through again. "Bonner, whatever you're seeing, you need to move. Now." Bonner didn't respond. He knew this was the end. The Xelfar had won. Earth was falling. Bonner could barely breathe. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. His squad had just made it inside the subway tunnels beneath New York, but the moment they reached safety, exhaustion hit like a freight train. They had been running, fighting, bleeding, pushing past the limits of human endurance. But now, standing in the dim underground station, they could hear the truth above them. Earth was dying. The rumble of collapsing buildings, the distant echoes of screaming civilians, and the mechanical hum of the Xelfar drones moving through the city all merged into one terrible sound. The sound of extinction. Holt sat against a broken pillar, gripping her wounded arm. Blood seeped through the fabric of her sleeve, but she barely reacted. There was no point in worrying about wounds when death was knocking on the door. Across from her, Sergeant Cole was reloading his rifle, his hand steady despite the hopelessness in his eyes. Bonner ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair, trying to think. "We can't stay here forever." "No," Holt muttered, wincing as she adjusted her position. "But where do we go? The surface is a graveyard." Cole let out a dry laugh. "We should have died up there. Maybe we already did." No one had the energy to argue. The tunnels weren't much of a refuge. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. The scent of mildew mixed with the lingering smoke drifting in from above. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped. It was quiet, too quiet. Then they heard it. A mechanical whine. Faint at first, then growing louder. Bonner froze. The others did too. It was a sound they had learned to fear, the movement of Xelfar hunter drones. "Shut off all lights," Bonner whispered. The squad immediately killed their flashlights, plunging the tunnel into near-total darkness. Only the dim glow of emergency signs remained. The whine grew closer. Then came the footsteps, light, deliberate, inhuman. Bonner gritted his teeth. The Xelfar weren't just searching. They knew. A red glow flickered at the far end of the tunnel. A single, piercing light. An eye. Then another. And another. The drones moved like wraiths, stepping in eerie synchronization. Their sleek black bodies blended with the shadows, but their glowing eyes burned through the darkness. There were 6 of them. No, 10. Bonner's grip on his rifle tightened. Even at full strength, his squad couldn't take on this many. And they weren't at full strength. Not even close. Holt let out a slow breath. She had already drawn a knife. If they were going to die, she wasn't going down without a fight. The drones paused. Their heads twitched unnaturally as they scanned the area. Bonner's heart pounded. The first drone took a step forward, then another. Its head turned, red optics locking onto the squad's position. Cole whispered, "They see us." The drone's arm snapped up, and its plasma cannon whined to life. "Move," Bonner roared. The tunnel erupted into chaos. A plasma bolt slammed into the concrete where they had just been, sending shards of debris flying. The squad scattered, sprinting down the tunnels, weaving between old train cars and shattered pillars. The drones advanced without hesitation, firing with terrifying precision. Bonner ducked behind a collapsed section of the tunnel as a bolt of energy seared past his head. He turned just in time to see Cole get hit. The plasma struck him in the side, sending him sprawling against the wall. No, Holt tried to reach him, but Bonner grabbed her arm. "He's gone," he said, forcing the words out. They couldn't afford to stop. Holt's face twisted with rage, but she kept moving. They ran deeper into the tunnels, their footsteps echoing through the dark. It didn't matter how fast they were. The HFY didn't tire. They didn't stop. Bonner spotted an old maintenance shaft ahead. There. They dove inside, barely squeezing through the narrow passage before slamming the hatch shut behind them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sound of metal scraping against metal. The drones were cutting through. Bonner looked around. They were in an old, abandoned control station. Broken screens flickered with static. Dust covered the consoles. This place had been forgotten for years, but it was their only chance. Holt grabbed Bonner's shoulder. "We're running out of time." He nodded, scanning the room. His eyes landed on an old power grid control panel. A desperate idea formed in his mind. "Help me overload this," he said, running to the console. Holt hesitated. "You think an EMP will stop them?" Bonner didn't answer, because he didn't know. But it was better than doing nothing. Together, they ripped open the panel, exposing the ancient wiring beneath. Sparks flew as they worked, hot metal searing their fingertips. Then came the loud clang, the sound of the hatch breaking open. The drones stepped inside, their glowing eyes cutting through the dark. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Holt met Bonner's gaze. They weren't going to finish in time. "I'll buy you a few seconds," she said. Bonner opened his mouth to protest, but she was already moving. She charged the drones, knife in one hand, pistol in the other. She dodged the first strike, ducked under a plasma bolt, and plunged the knife into the nearest drone's throat. Sparks erupted as the machine convulsed. But the others were already on her. Bonner heard the shots, heard the sound of metal tearing, heard Holt scream. Then silence. He didn't look. He couldn't. His hand shook as he yanked the final cable loose. "Come on, you son of a..." A surge of energy erupted from the console. The room flashed white. The air filled with the sound of frying circuits and electrical screams. Then, nothing. Bonner slowly opened his eyes. The drones lay motionless. Their red eyes had flickered out. He was alive. But as he turned, his stomach twisted. Holt was on the ground, motionless, blood pooling around her. Bonner staggered toward her, falling to his knees. "Holt." She didn't respond. He clenched his jaw, forcing back the grief. There was no time to mourn. He had to keep moving. He grabbed his rifle and took one last look at the fallen drones. The EMP had worked, but it wouldn't work again. The HFY would adapt. And Bonner. He was out of plans. He stumbled through the station, his mind blank, his body on autopilot. The tunnels were empty now, but not for long. Outside, Earth was still burning. The HFY had won. And for the first time since the war started, Bonner felt it. Hopelessness. Bonner pulled himself out of the tunnels, his body aching, his mind numb. The world above was unrecognizable. New York, once a city of towering skyscrapers and blinding lights, was now a wasteland of burning metal and shattered glass. The sky was filled with the HFY's warships, their monstrous forms blocking out the sun. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground trembled under the weight of the enemy's machines. Humanity had fought, but humanity had lost. Yet Bonner kept moving. He wasn't the only one. Scattered across the ruins, pockets of human resistance still clung to life. Soldiers, survivors, anyone still breathing, each carrying a weapon, each with the same fire in their eyes. They had no reinforcements coming, no miracles. This was it. Bonner spotted Commander Work crouched behind a destroyed tank, barking orders into a damaged comm unit. The man's uniform was torn, his face covered in blood and ash, but his voice was steady. Bonner made his way over. "We're still alive." Work let out a dry laugh. "Barely." His eyes flicked to the sky. The HFY think we're finished. They're rounding up survivors, crushing any last pockets of resistance. We have one chance to hit back before they tighten their grip. Bonner wiped sweat from his brow. What's the plan? Rourke's expression hardened. The orbital defense cannon. Bonner blinked. I thought it was destroyed. Rourke shook his head. It's damaged, but the core is still intact. We can power it up manually, if we can fire even one shot. Bonner understood. The HFY's mothership was in low orbit, coordinating the invasion. A single, well-placed blast could cripple their command structure. It wouldn't win the war, but it would buy Earth time. And time was all they needed. Bonner nodded. Where do we start? Rourke signaled to a group of soldiers. About 20 of them, what remained of the resistance. The cannon's control center is deep in enemy territory, Rourke explained. We break through, power it up, and fire everything we've got. He exhaled. No one's coming to save us, Bonner. This is it. Bonner looked around. These men and women knew they wouldn't be coming back. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting to give humanity a chance. Rourke lifted his rifle. Move out. The resistance charge. They weaved through the ruins, keeping low, darting between burning vehicles and collapsed buildings. Above them, Zelfar drones patrolled the skies, their red optics scanning for movement. Then, an explosion. The HFY had spotted them. Bonner hit the ground as plasma fire rained down. The soldier next to him didn't move. Keep going, Rourke shouted. Bonner scrambled up, firing his rifle at the enemy. The drones were relentless, fast, precise, unstoppable. But the humans fought like demons. Grenades exploded in tight alleyways, EMPs sent drones crashing into rubble, and snipers picked off enemy forces with ruthless efficiency. The fight was brutal. The resistance was outgunned, outnumbered, but not outmatched. They were human. One by one, they pushed forward, cutting through enemy lines. The cannon's control center was just ahead, hidden within the ruins of an old military base. Bonner and Rourke reached the entrance, breathing hard. Get inside, Rourke ordered. The remaining soldiers rushed in. Half their team was already gone, their bodies left behind in the rubble. Bonner didn't think about them. He couldn't. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The control center was barely operational, screens shattered, wires sparking, consoles covered in debris. But the power core was still intact. Bonner ran to the main console. Tell me you can get this thing working. Rourke grabbed a toolkit and started bypassing the damaged circuits. It'll take a minute. A minute was too long. The HFY had followed them. The first drone entered through the collapsed doorway. Then another. Bonner didn't hesitate. He opened fire, the rifle kicking hard against his shoulder. The first drone crumpled, sparks flying. The second lunged. Bonner barely dodged as it swiped at him with a razor-sharp blade. A grenade went off, shaking the room. More drones flooded in. The resistance was down to a handful of soldiers, each fighting like cornered animals. Bonner grabbed a fallen shotgun, blasting a drone at close range. The metallic carcass slammed into the wall, twitching before going still. Rourke cursed. Almost there. Bonner turned. We don't have. A drone tackled him, slamming him against the console. Cold metal pressed against his throat. Bonner struggled, reaching for his knife. A gunshot rang out. The drone collapsed. Rourke stood over it, smoking pistol in hand. We're online. Bonner coughed, shoving the machine off him. Fire the damn thing. Rourke slammed a fist on the launch panel. Warning lights flashed. The cannon hummed to life. Outside, the sky burned. A massive beam of energy erupted from the ruins, cutting through the clouds. The air screamed as the shot tore through the atmosphere, heading straight for the HFY mothership. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, impact. The mothership shuddered. Explosions erupted across its surface, fire and metal raining from the sky. The HFY's war machines hesitated. Their hive mind had taken a blow. Bonner grinned. They weren't invincible. But the battle wasn't over. A massive tremor rocked the control center. The HFY were retaliating. Rourke grabbed Bonner's shoulder. "We did what we came for. Time to go." They turned to run. A blast tore through the wall. Bonner hit the ground hard, ears ringing. Through blurred vision, he saw Rourke slump against the console, a smoking wound in his chest. Bonner crawled to him. "No, stay with me." Rourke coughed, blood staining his lips. He smiled. "We won't see the end," Rourke whispered, "but humanity will." Then he was gone. Bonner clenched his fists. There was no time to grieve. He grabbed his rifle, turned, and ran. Outside, the battlefield had changed. The HFY were faltering. Their mothership was falling. And from the east, Bonner saw them. Human reinforcements. Survivors. Resistance fighters. The last army of Earth. They were charging. Bonner gritted his teeth, raised his weapon, and ran to meet them. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Bonner ran through the burning streets, his heart pounding as the echoes of battle filled the air. The sky was a swirling chaos of fire and metal, the HFY mothership breaking apart in orbit, raining debris down on the shattered Earth. But even as the enemy's command structure collapsed, their ground forces fought on, their war machines still tearing through what little remained of humanity's defenses. The resistance had bought time. Now they had to survive long enough to use it. A group of survivors rushed past him. Civilians, soldiers, anyone still standing, heading toward a makeshift bunker in the ruins of a collapsed skyscraper. Bonner grabbed a wounded soldier, slinging the man's arm over his shoulder, dragging him forward. "Move, move," someone shouted. The ground trembled as an enemy walker fired its plasma cannons, vaporizing a street block behind them. Bonner didn't look back. He only ran. Inside the bunker, he laid the soldier down, gasping for breath. Around him, the room was filled with the last remnants of humanity's resistance. Bloody, exhausted, but still standing. Rourke was gone. The resistance had no leader now. It was just them. Bonner forced himself up. Status. A woman in tattered combat armor, one of the surviving officers, wiped sweat from her face. The HFY are regrouping. Their main fleet is gone, but their ground forces are still operational. We've cut off their communications, but they're adapting. We won't last another wave. Bonner exhaled. The HFY weren't just mindless machines. Even without their mothership, they were evolving, adjusting their strategy. They had come to conquer, and they weren't leaving without a fight. A voice crackled through the comms. "This is General Hayes of the Lunar Resistance. We've received your signal. Reinforcements are inbound." Bonner's eyes widened. Lunar Resistance. The officer's face was pale. "We thought they were wiped out." Hayes continued, his voice strained. "We weren't. We've been waiting for an opening, and you just gave us one." Outside, the air split with the roar of engines. Bonner rushed to the bunker entrance, his breath catching. Dropships. Sleek, black, heavily armored. Human warships, rising from the moon bases thought to have been lost in the first attack. Hundreds of them, cutting through the atmosphere like avenging ghosts. The HFY turned their weapons to the sky, plasma turrets locking on. The first human ship fired. A brilliant blue beam tore through an enemy walker, reducing it to molten slag. Missiles followed, streaking through the air, hammering the alien war machines. The HFY forces hesitated, their formations breaking apart. Then the dropships opened, and humanity fell from the sky. Exo-suited soldiers, heavy artillery. Battle mechs built for one purpose: revenge. The ground trembled as the two forces clashed. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a reckoning. Bonner gritted his teeth. They had a chance. He turned to the resistance fighters behind him. They had fought alone for too long. But not anymore. He raised his rifle. "We're not done yet." A cheer rose around him, hoarse, desperate, but filled with something they had almost forgotten: hope. And then they charge. The battle was chaos. Plasma fire cut through the streets. Explosions rocked the ground. Metal screamed against metal. The HFY fought with cold efficiency, their machines ruthless and relentless. But humans fought with something else. They fought with rage. They fought for every friend lost, every city burned, every child who would never see the sky again. Bonner weaved through the battlefield, gunning down enemy drones, tossing grenades into the legs of towering war machines. Around him, resistance fighters fought alongside the lunar forces, the last remnants of Earth's warriors standing together. A Xelfar officer, its sleek metallic form gleaming in the firelight, turned its glowing red eyes toward Bonner. It moved fast, faster than anything he had ever faced. In an instant, it was on him. A sharp blade extended from its arm, slashing toward his chest. Bonner barely dodged, the blade slicing through his armor, cutting deep into his side. He grunted in pain, stumbling back. The alien raised its weapon for the killing blow. A gunshot rang out. The Xelfar officer jerked, a hole blasted through its head. Bonner turned. A young soldier, no older than 20, lowered her rifle, her hands shaking. Bonner nodded. "Good shot." The girl swallowed hard, gripping her weapon tighter. "Keep moving." The battle raged for hours. Humanity didn't stop. They didn't surrender. They didn't break. And then the tide turned. The Xelfar, once an unstoppable force, began to retreat. Their war machines pulled back. Their drones disengaged. Their forces crumbled. Bonner staggered forward, his vision blurring. It was over. But something was wrong. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air. Bonner turned his gaze skyward and froze. The Xelfar mothership, the one they had destroyed, was still there. Not intact, not functional, but still alive. Its remains hovered in the atmosphere, broken, burning, yet something moved inside. A signal, a final transmission. Bonner's comm crackled. A cold, metallic voice spoke. "We were never the first." The transmission cut out. The air turned silent. And then the stars shifted. A new fleet appeared on the horizon. Larger, darker. Bonner's blood ran cold. The Xelfar were invaders. But they weren't alone. And humanity had just awakened something far, far worse. The battlefield lay in silence, broken only by the crackling flames of wreckage and the distant echoes of warships leaving the planet's orbit. The Xelfar were gone. What remained of them had either fled or been reduced to nothing but twisted metal. The air was thick with the smell of burnt machinery and scorched earth. But for the first time in months, there was something else. Bonner stood among the ruins, his rifle hanging loosely in his grip. His body ached, his wounds screamed, but he barely noticed. He was still alive. Somehow, against all odds, humanity had survived. The other soldiers moved slowly through the wreckage, checking for survivors, gathering what little resources they had left. Some sat on broken walls, staring at the horizon as if waiting for the next fight. They had spent so long running, so long fighting, that peace almost felt like a dream. Bonner turned his gaze skyward. The Xelfar fleet had been defeated, but what he had seen before their final transmission haunted him. A new enemy was coming. Something bigger, something worse. He clenched his fists. It didn't matter. Humanity had been outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly wiped from existence, but they had survived. And if something else was coming, then so be it. They would be ready. A voice called out behind him. "Sir, you need to see this." Bonner turned. A young soldier, her uniform torn and blood-stained, stood near a wrecked Xelfar war machine. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something between awe and terror. He walked over, stepping over shattered debris and broken bodies. And then he saw it. The HFY machine had been torn open from the inside, its core exposed. But it was empty. No circuits, no machinery, no sign of AI at all. Just organic matter. Bonner frowned, his mind racing. The HFY weren't just machines. They had something else inside them. Something living. Something they had never understood. A faint light flickered inside the remains. A holographic projection sparked to life, crackling and unstable. Bonner watched as a figure appeared. It wasn't HFY. It wasn't human. It was something else. The image was distorted, its features blurred, but the message was clear. You were never meant to win. Bonner's breath caught. The war you fought was never yours. The projection flickered, its voice hollow, distant, like an echo from a forgotten time. You have awakened something far older than you can imagine. And then the sky changed. Far above, beyond the burned clouds and broken atmosphere, the stars shifted. Shapes moved. Shadows stretched across the sky. The HFY weren't the real enemy. They had been running from something. Bonner exhaled slowly, gripping his weapon tighter. The others around him watched in silence, waiting for him to speak, to give orders, to lead. He looked at them, humans who had lost everything and still refused to fall. Soldiers who had fought for a dying planet and still stood ready. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors. Bonner turned to the rising dawn, the first light shining through the smoke-covered horizon. The world was broken, burned beyond recognition, but it was still theirs. And whatever was coming next, they would face it together. Humanity had stood alone before, and they would do it again. The legend had just begun.